In today's video, we are going to go over the best builds for Season 1 of New World. Now, these builds will be specifically aimed for PvE and group PvE with that in mind. So we're talking about expeditions or mutated expeditions in particular. Now, obviously, these builds or playstyles are going to be subject to my opinion, so you guys might want to make some tweaks here and there. But as a general rule of thumb, I think the builds that we cover in today's video are going to be something that you will see a lot of other players running in the game. So if you just kind of want to fit in or learn what the meta is for Season 1, that's what today's video is about. As always, if you guys find this video useful, make sure you go ahead and click the like button, subscribe for more, and let's get it going with the first build for today's video, which is going to be the tank. Now, the common tanking build in New World is something that hasn't actually really changed that much over even so like the past year. Basically, since mutated expeditions were introduced, we've seen tanks running heavy armor with a sword and shield, and typically their second weapon is a warhammer, and that's exactly what we are going to debut today. So our weapons of choice, as I mentioned, are going to be the sword and a tower shield in particular. It is important that you guys run a tower shield because it gives you the highest amount of block stability, which means that when you hold up your block like this, you can take more damage before your stamina gets completely broken. So, you know, as you take hits to your shield, your stamina will go down. The more block stability you have, the slower your stamina goes down. So Tower Shield is going to be the best for this heavily armored tank build. The second weapon of choice is going to be the Warhammer. There are a few other weapons that you can run in this slot as a secondary for a tank, but Warhammer is just one of the best weapons for providing lots of crowd control. So we're talking about stuns, slows, knockdowns. It's just very good at disrupting the enemies from attacking you and your teammates. As we also mentioned, the armor of choice is going to be heavy armor. The reason behind this, probably as a no-brainer, is because it allows you to take more damage. There are also some benefits of being in heavy as well. If I take my camera off here, you can see that heavy provides you with more block stability, as we talked about. It also reduces the incoming crowd control duration, so if you get stunned or slowed, it doesn't last as long. Outgoing healing doesn't really matter to us as a tank. And it also allows you to get back into running quicker. The bottom line there, it says for 0.5 seconds after taking a melee hit, you cannot run. This doesn't really matter too much, but it is, I guess, a positive of being in a heavy equip load. Now, when it comes to weapon mastery for a sword and shield heavy armor tank, this is the standard build that I would recommend you guys run. Now, some people who are new to tanking may want to switch from leadership over to defensive formation. If you are a bit more of a beginner tank, this is going to be easier for you. It just gives you a 30% damage reduction, allows you to stay alive longer. But leadership over here, those of you who are looking to get into tanking and go as like a full-time profession in it, this is the recommended one to do because it gives you and everybody in your party a 10% damage buff just so you can get through the dungeon faster, and it's kind of like the expected thing for experienced tanks to run. Defender's Resolve is your taunt ability. It also gives you a pretty awesome damage reduction as well. This is a must-have. Shield Rush, also in my opinion, a must-have, and you want to combine this with the Fortifying Shield Rush perk, which we'll talk about later. Again, very, very strong. And then you have the choice between Leaping Strike or Reverse Stab over here. I like to go for Leaping Strike just as a way to move around faster as a tank, reposition. If there is an archer that's attacking my healer, I can Leaping Strike them really quickly, hit them to get the aggro, and then go back to the melee mobs that are on us. But you may prefer to go for Reverse Stab and take the Tactician upgrade here to reduce the cooldowns of everything else. I know that's still a pretty popular strategy with tanks. Looking at the Warhammer build, this is the like one-size-fits-all that I would recommend. You might want to change Wrecking Ball for Mighty Gavel. Some people also choose to go with Path of Destiny, but I highly recommend you go for Shockwave, as this is the taunt. In fact, this is non-negotiable. Shockwave is always happening. And then Clear Out is actually a surprisingly good ability. When I first sort of looked at this and saw that tanks were using this, I thought they were trolling because it says it knocks back enemies. So you have all the enemies clumped up for your melee and then you knock them all back. Like, why would you want to do that? But it turns out in mutated expeditions, this doesn't actually knock them back, it knocks them down. So yeah, it's a bit of a different ability entirely. Just knocking them down. Also provides a 20% fortify for you and all friendlies within 6 meters. So this is going to be the melee that are in with you. Yeah, it's a pretty handy build. And then the Aftershock ultimate down here just provides a little bit extra slows as well to stop any sort of runaway mobs going to your healer too fast. Stats for the standard tank build are going to look a little bit something like this. Back in the day, it was very common to go to 300 strength, 200 constitution. However, they removed the power level of 300 strength, where it used to give you grit on all of your attacks, which was really, really good. That's been moved to 300 constitution. But the general consensus is that if you go to 300 constitution, you're just not doing enough damage, which means that you're more likely to lose lose the threat on enemies. So instead, we opt to go put 50 points into dexterity here because the sword, which is obviously the very like common weapon that a tank will be running, does benefit from having a few points into dexterity. In fact, actually, by putting some points into dexterity, this actually allows the sword to do more damage because you get this thing called diminishing returns, where if we just put lots of points into strength, at some point it actually becomes better to put points into dexterity because the scaling of the sword is better. It's a confusing video, but I'll link to a video from Duke Sloth. He made it a while ago, but it explains it better than I can if you guys are interested. Why these specific values is because they just give you the best benefits, so the best bang for your buck. So getting a 10% increased chance to critical hit is very nice. Having an increase in physical and elemental armor is also like really, really good. And then just getting a few extra benefits from strength here, but primarily strength is just here because it scales with our two weapons of choice, the Warhammer and the Sword and Shield. Now, when it comes to gems and heart runes with the tank, gems and the weapons that you're always going to go for are the Carnelian gems. So a cut pristine Carnelian gem socketed into your weapon will activate your taunts and also increase your threat by 300%, which is just like, you know, a no-brainer. Gotta go for that if you want to play tank. Gems in the armor, we'll actually do a quick section at the end of this video to explain sort of gems in the armor and your jewelry and stuff, so skip forward to the end of the video because this is going to apply to all builds and we don't want to just keep repeating ourselves over and over again here. And then for heart rune, my recommendation is just to go for the stone form heart rune. There are a few other options you can go here, but this is the safest bet for me as the tank. In particular, the Stalwart version, if you are going to upgrade to legendary, gives you the heal. If you're standing in sacred ground, that heal is increased even more so. This just makes you very hard to take down as a tank. Now, the last thing to talk about here is for our perks on our weapons, armor, and jewelry. Now, one perk that you're going to see throughout all of these builds is some form of ward and also some form of bane. We will move that sort of explanation to the end of the video as well because this applies to all of our builds, whether it's tank, healer, or DPS. But the other perks outside of ward and bane include refreshing move. I think this is a must-have on the sword because it allows you to lower your cooldowns every time you attack the enemies. When it comes to your Warhammer, a must-have is Sundering Shockwave. It applies rend, making the enemies take more damage. I think this is just a no-brainer to get on the Warhammer. And then also having Fortifying Shield Rush on your shield is, again, in my opinion, a must-have perk as it increases your Fortify by a significant amount, which just makes you take like way less damage after you pop Fortifying Shield Rush. When it comes to ability perks on your armor, the only one that I would really go out of my way to get is Accelerated Resolve. And if you're going to be running Reverse Stab, you could also get Contagious Reverse Stab as well. But those are the only perks that I really go for in terms of the ability perks. For perks on your jewelry, you want to get health and then the relevant protection. And again, we'll talk about protection, ward, and bane towards the end of this video. For the ring, Simon Tacksilver ring, which comes from the mutated Starstone Barrows, is incredibly good. It's got hearty, slash damage, and leeching. These are like the three perks that you want as a tank. Slash damage because we're going to spend most of the time attacking with a sword. Leeching for a little bit of health regen, and hearty just to mean that we can block or dodge a little bit like longer. Earring perks that are a must-have are Despised and Refreshing Toast. You really want to get Despised just to, again, make sure that the enemies stay more focused on you, and Refreshing Toast means you can pop health potions more often so you're less likely to die. Now, moving on to our next build or roll, we are going to be talking about DPS. So this is your damage roll. Now, there are quite a lot of different options you can go for on DPS, but again, because of this video, we are talking about the best, and the build that I am going to recommend is Greatsword and Spear. But this can also be Great Axe and Spear, or you can also do Greatsword and Great Axe. Basically, the two-handed melee weapons are typically the strongest when it comes to the DPS roll for expeditions. So again, for this particular build, we are running the Greatsword, and we're also going to go with Spear here as well. And the equipment weight that you want to go for can be either light or medium. It's very rare that you'll see a DPS playing in heavy. It can be done, but most people would expect you to be in light because you get the base damage plus 20%, so you get an extra 20% damage bonus, and you also get access to the very powerful dodge roll, which is really good for moving out of certain mechanics as well. However, medium is also an option, and it's sometimes you see players run this. Now, in order to be in a medium equip load, there is a special formula you can run for armor that typically involves a heavy helmet, a heavy chest, medium gloves, light legs, and medium boots. By doing so, this maximizes the amount of armor that you get off of each piece, but it allows you to just stay in the medium threshold. So you kind of get the best of both worlds, where you're in medium, but you're also getting a lot of armor from your equipment. When it comes to weapon mastery for this build, 3 perks that I would highly recommend that you go for on the Spear, and in my opinion, this is non-negotiable, is Skewer. Then we also go for Perforate, and we go for Leg Sweep. Leg Sweep is a nice CC option, so we can knock enemies down on the ground and often interrupt a lot of abilities. We also have Perforate here as well, which applies Rend, and also, very importantly, applies Weaken as well. We talked about Weaken at the beginning of this video. I think Weaken is very important to reduce the enemy's damage. Because we had a nerf to Fortify in Season 1, where Fortify doesn't really increase or decrease the amount of damage you take as much as it used to in the past. The way that we can sort of counteract the nerf to Fortify that Amazon did is instead weaken the enemy and reduce their outgoing damage. So anything that weakens is really good, which is why Spear, in my opinion, is an S tier weapon and kind of like a must-have for DPS players. Although it is, you know, you kind of don't need more than one, but to be honest, it's still a good thing to have lots of spears, in my opinion. Now, Skewer is here not necessarily because of the power level of Skewer, but because there is a perk associated with Skewer, which makes it really, really good. And we will talk about that particular perk shortly in this particular section of the guide. Weapon mastery for the Greatsword includes Relentless Rush, Skyward Slash, and Roaring Rupture, and we do aim to pick up the Unrelenting Onslaught passive on the left just for some really good cooldown reduction so we can spam our abilities more often. Relentless Rush is great when paired with the Relentless Freedom perk, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this video. And generally, we're looking to take passives that kind of increase our damage or give us a little bit extra survivability. So giving us a 100% increased crit chance, very nice. Giving us a 10% empower for more damage, very nice. Also, Rupture over here is actually a very good ability because it applies a Weaken. And again, we've talked about the importance of Weaken earlier on in this video. You can also get Grit on your heavy attacks, which is great with Unflinching Blade, and you can pull enemies in together, which is also going to be very useful for just hitting multiple enemies all at the same time and getting them nice and clumped up. Skyward Slash is here as a way to apply some Rend so the enemy takes more damage, and you could switch out Skyfall Sword for Swift Onslaught, and if you're playing against enemies that heal a lot, so you're going into a nature mutation, you could swap out something like Keen Posture for Sickening Slash to also apply a bit of a healing reduction as well. Attributes for this build want to look something a bit like this, so we have 200 Strength, 200 Dexterity, and 100 Constitution. Any bonus points could go into either Strength or Dexterity, it's kind of your choice. The reason why we're going for both of these is because both the Spear and the Greatsword scale off of Strength and Dexterity, but just focusing on one again will make us hit that diminishing returns point. 100 Constitution, in my opinion, is a baseline that you want to go for here. Dropping below it can be done, but it is risky. You will see some players go as low as 50 or even 5 Constitution. But as, you know, a relatively new DPS player myself, and a recommendation to you guys, I would go for 100 Constitution just to make sure you don't die as often. Now, moving over to gems and the Heart Rune for this build, I would recommend that you put Opal gems in your weapon. It says 15% damage when your stamina is not full, which you can very easily achieve by just dodging. So if you dodge, your stamina is not full. However, if you have a tricky time sort of managing or remembering to dodge, you know, I know there's some players out there, then maybe you want to go for a diamond instead. The diamond says that while your health is full, you do extra damage. Now, obviously, that's going to require your healer to be on top of it, but if you're standing in Sacred Ground and Beacon, that can be achieved relatively easily. But Opal is a good recommendation to give you better control over when you get that damage boost after dodging. For gems in the armor, again, I'm going to defer you guys to the section at the end of this video where we talk about gems and also the Ward perk and the Bane perk. Again, well, we'll put that to the end of the video because it's relevant for all builds. The Heart Rune for a DPS, I would recommend that you go for the Firestorm Heart Rune. Again, this has a Weaken built into it. It's just really nice. The more Weaken effects we can get, the better. And this version just hits really, really hard. The Brutal Heart Rune of Firestorm, it makes it so that it doesn't burn, but it does 200% weapon damage. You can also go for the Detonate Rune as well. That's another option. Explodes for a lot of damage, and this one in particular is good against the Corrupted. Now, perks that make this build tick include Trenchant Strikes on the Greatsword, so fully charged heavy attacks do 20% extra damage. You can see fully charged heavies are pretty slow like this, but if we use any one of our red abilities, our Onslaught abilities, we go into Onslaught mode, which then allows us to heavy attack quite a bit faster and just get some extra like juicy value out of those Trenchant Strikes. Also, it keeps our stamina under 100%, which is really good for activating the Opal gem as well. On the Spear, a must-have perk is the Enfeebling Skewer. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but it says Skewer hits apply Weaken, which reduces target's damage by 44%. A 44% damage reduction to a boss is just absolutely game-changing. And then also you can extend the duration of debuffs somewhere in here as well. I forgot where it is. Here we go. Critical hits extend the duration of spear debuffs by 20%, and you do crit pretty often with the spear, so you can keep that sort of debuff permanently on the boss. Really, really good. Now, ability perks that you want to put in your armor include Relentless Freedom. You don't really want to bother getting this on your Greatsword because it doesn't become any better, but it removes roots and slows, which are really good for certain mutations. And then also, it is optional. You don't have to do it, but Fortifying Perforate increases the Fortify you get from Perforate, or rather gives you Fortify from Perforate, which just makes you a little bit tankier. And you can also go for Bleeding Sweep to do a little bit extra damage damage as well. Again, these aren't necessary, like, you know, mandatory, like the sort of enfeebling skewer and relentless freedom are, but they're still pretty good pickups as well. When it comes to jewelry, some must-have perks include health and then protection, and again, I will defer you guys to the end of the video for the protection perks. For ring perks, I would recommend getting the Legate's Ring specifically. This comes from chests and brimstone sands, if I'm not mistaken, and it's really, really good, having keen, slash damage, and leeching, 3 insanely good perks. The reason why we want to go for slash damage instead of thrust damage is because the playstyle is generally to just use your abilities on the spear and then switch over to the greatsword to actually like do damage. So you want to be doing like most of your sort of heavy attacks and just general sort of spam light click and you know, you want to be doing most of your sort of spam attacks with the greatsword and just using abilities on the spear as we mentioned. So having slash damage really good here, keen for crit chance, leeching, life steal, just a really good set of perks on the ring there. And then on the earring, we are looking for Beloved and Refreshing Toast. You can get a third perk, but these are the two that are sort of baseline. Beloved is going to make it so that you pull aggro off of your tank less often, and Refreshing Toast is just good because you can use your health potions, regen potions more often. Now, the last top build we have to talk about is for healer, and that involves the Life Staff and Void Gauntlet. Unlike with the tank and DPS builds, there's kind of only really like a one weapon choice that works for healer when it comes to PvE group content. You know, I've seen some people doing Life Staff and Ice Gauntlet, but these two weapons are just like hands down the best support weapons in the game, and this is what you're going to be running as a healer in New World. When it comes to armor choice for the healer, there is only one choice, and that is a light equip load. So you can maximize a little bit on the armor value by running a medium chest. Medium chest will give you more armor than a light chest, but it will still keep you in the light equip load. So yeah, we're looking at light helmet, medium chest, light gloves, light legs, and light boots. And the reason why that we say light is like the only choice is because it gives us an outgoing healing buff of 30%. So you can read there in the light bonus, base damage 20%, outgoing healing 30%. So healing for 30% more. Medium is a 0% healing bonus, and heavy is a minus 30%. So yeah, that 30% extra healing is so good. It is mandatory to have as a healer. Now, moving into the weapon mastery for this build, there are actually a few different options that you can go for when it comes to healing. One heal that you're always going to be running is Sacred Ground. It increases healing by 50%. It's just so good if you pop this down before a fight. Increasing any other heal by 50%, just a must-have perk or a must-have ability in my opinion. I like to run this all AoE healing build here with Beacon and Orb of Protection as well, but you can go for something like a Divine Embrace in place of Orb, or you could even go for Splash of Light in place of Orb as well. But these days I'm recommending that you go for Sacred Ground and Beacon, and then you can sort of switch out Orb for Splash or Divine Embrace, whichever one you choose. When it comes to why I haven't picked up this ultimate here, it's not because I don't like it, it's because I can't afford the points, but I will defer you guys to the healer guide. Again, you can check that in the description down below if you want a sort of more in-depth rundown on different sort of healer spells and abilities that we can take and different ways you can do your skill mastery tree here. Now, Void Gauntlet is again a bit of a mix-up here. You can run some different abilities depending on what sort of playstyle you're going with, but I'm going to talk about the playstyle that I most commonly use, which is going in with the Void Blade, and this also works in synergy with our AoE heals as well. So we're kind of just going in where we put our heals down like this, all three of them, and then we switch to the Void Blade and just start swinging. Now, this works well when you have an all melee group, but again, if you guys want more nuances when it comes to different healer builds and playing different playstyles with these skill trees, again, check out the healer guide down below. But Oblivion is something that gives our team a damage buff, so it increases everybody's damage by 15%. It also applies Weaken when we hit enemies that are inside of the Oblivion, and we've talked about a Weaken throughout this guide and how important it is to apply to the enemies. Void Blade is a great way to deal damage. In fact, it's kind of the only way that a healer can really deal any damage. Like Life Staff, sort of ranged attacks don't really do much, and same with Void Gauntlet ranged attacks. They're just not very impressive. So if you do want to help contribute a little bit of damage, Void Blade is great for that. And then we have Scream. Now, this is an optional ability, but I highly encourage you guys to run Scream if you are going into a mutation or an expedition where the enemies heal. So expeditions that include this is anytime there is a nature mutation. So Starstone Barrows, right now there is nature, and it says compost. Enemies leave a zone upon death, healing enemies that stand in it for 3% health per second. So you want to reduce that healing by applying Scream, and there's a perk that makes that happen that we'll talk about a little bit later on in this particular section of the guide. Another dungeon where the enemies do a lot of healing is the Empyrean Forge. So although this isn't nature, the enemies do still do a lot of healing because there is enemies with a Life Staff in there. So there's going to be other healers that you have to compete against. So using Scream can counteract that healing in a pretty significant way, which is why we recommend it. But if you aren't going into a mutation or dungeon that has healing, then you can just look to switch out your Petrifying Scream, in my opinion, for Orb of Decay, and keep the other two abilities here the same. Stats that are important for this build include 50 intelligence, just to do a little bit of extra damage with the Void Gauntlet. Then we have a good chunk of points into focus, 300 plus. You don't have to go above 300, but still having points above 300 does increase your healing. Then I usually hover around the 130 to 140 constitution line. It just means if that I make a mistake, or if the tank loses aggro to me, that I don't get one shot by having 140. It seems to be like a nice safe area. But if you want to, you could drop down to 100 constitution, take a few more points out of focus, and go up to 100 intelligence just to hit extra hard. Now, when it comes to the gems and heart rune for a healer, again, we are going to defer the gems in the armor to a later point in the video. So just after we talk about this, we'll talk about gems in the armor for all builds. But gems in your weapon, you want to be going for a diamond. You can even go for a rune glass diamond if you want. I think it is a little bit overkill, but a diamond in your life staff is a must-have because it increases your healing by 15%. So diamond in the life staff, just no brainer. Go for it every time. Here's just like good old Will of the Ancients where I've got my diamond in here. Something like that, just great for healing. And when it comes to Void Gauntlet, you have a couple of options here. You could go for an Opal Gem, so when you dodge, you do a little bit extra damage, or you can opt to take a gem in your Void Gauntlet, which is specifically catered against the enemy that you're fighting against. So this gets a little bit more complicated here, and maybe we'll try and defer to some link in the description down below. But to quickly explain, when you are fighting Ancients, the Ancients are particularly weak to lightning damage, so using a Topaz Gem converts some of your damage into lightning, which is then going to be extra effective against the Ancients. However, if you're fighting against the Corrupted are weaker to Arcane, so having a Sapphire Gem in your Void Gauntlet converts some of the damage into Arcane, which is again going to be extra strong against the Corrupted. So in order to really maximize this, you need to know the sort of mobs that you're going to be going against, and you also need to know the damage that those mobs are weak against. But we'll try and include some sort of link in the description down below, which gives a breakdown of, weaknesses for particular mobs, and then you can find the corresponding gem to put in your Void Gauntlet. But again, this is only if you're going for Void Blade. If you're not doing a Void Blade build, just go for a diamond in the Void Gauntlet as well to increase the healing. My go-to heart rune for a healer is good old Stone Form. Just like with the tank, this keeps us alive, because if the tank dies or the healer dies, suddenly the run goes really, really badly. So just as a nice safe option, I would recommend Stone Form. But if you are looking to do a little bit something more supportive, you could also go for the Grasping Vines heart rune as well. This one in particular applies Weaken and Rend, which is just two really good effects, so increasing the damage the enemies take by 20%, and also reducing the damage they do by 20%, and an AoE while it roots them. Really good support sort of utility here. When it comes to perks on your weapons and armor and things that make this build tick, two basic perks that you always want to have on your life staff are Blessed and Refreshing Move. Without Blessed and Refreshing Move, your life staff just becomes so much worse. Blessed increases your healing, that's a no-brainer. And Refreshing Move, it says when light and heavy attacks activate, reduce your weapon cooldowns. The same with the tank playstyle. You just want to be doing a lot of left-clicking with this build. You also have the added synergy that as your light attacks pass through your teammates, they heal them, and then when they connect with the enemy, they reduce the cooldown, and then it also stacks with Revitalize, which also reduces cooldown. Just a really, really strong combo here, so getting Refreshing Move on the life staff is a no-brainer. I also like to go for Refreshing Move on my Void Gauntlet as well. I think this is a must-have perk for Void Gauntlet if you're using Void Blade. If you're not using Void Blade, you don't need Refreshing Move as much. And again, this perk here depends on whether you're using Scream or not. So if you're going to use Scream, you want to go for Putrefying Scream on your Void Gauntlet because it reduces the healing. We talked about how that can be relevant for certain mutations just a little bit earlier. Typically, another perk that you also want to be looking for is Corrupted Bane or Ancient Bane, the Bane perks as well. But again, we will talk about Bane just a little bit later on in this video, and when it is appropriate to get that particular perk. Perks that I like to take on my armor include Fortifying Sacred Ground, just increases the Fortify of Sacred Ground. Again, it's an ability we're always using, so we may as well give everybody a little bit extra armor when they're standing in it. I also like to take Keen Beacon. Beacon I'm using in pretty much all my builds these days. Increases the crit chance of players who get healed by it, just a little bit extra damage. And Voracious Blade. Now again, this is only a perk that you need to go for if you are using Blade, but if you're going to be using the Blade, getting a little bit extra lifesteal when you drop low can help you stay alive. It's just a solid perk. Perks on your jewelry that you want to go for, as with tank and healer, we always want to be taking health just to, again, have a little bit extra health so we don't die as often. And protection, we'll talk about that just a little bit later on in this video. For perks, when it comes to Healer Ring, Hearty and Sacred are a must-have. Hearty for the extra dodge is just going to allow you to stay alive for longer if you get, like, you know, the tank loses aggro. Sacred to increase your outgoing healing is a no-brainer. And then this perk is kind of optional. I've gone for Siphoning because this is just a fairly easy ring to get from mutated Starstone Barrows, but Refreshing or Refreshing Evasion would also be great here as well. Or even like Nature Damage or Void Damage could also work. Perks that you want to go for on your earring include Evasive or Beloved and Healthy Toast. Perks that you want to go for on your earring include Evasive or Beloved. Either of those work. I like to go for Evasive because it also synergizes with Bend Light, where when you dodge, you get a increase in healing, which again we get from our skill tree somewhere over here. I can't remember. There it is. So yeah, after you dodge, your heals are 20% more effective, and also after you dodge, you generate less threat. So it just, you know, it feels like it synergizes well with there, but you could go for Beloved. It's almost just as good in my opinion. And then Refreshing Toast, like with the tank and healer, allows you to use your potions more often. I also really like Healthy Toast as well, so it's kind of tricky. It's a toss-up for me between Refreshing Toast and Healthy Toast, just for some extra ability to stay alive. But if you had to choose, it would just be Evasive and Refreshing Toast, or Beloved and Refreshing Toast. Right, so the final part of this video that we have to talk about includes Ward, Bane, and Gems. Now, this is something that's universal across all builds, so I thought we'd put it in its own separate section. Now, the people ask, do you need to have Ward? Like, is Ward a must-have perk? And what I say is, if you are going for like an expedition into the jungle, you know, into the Amazon rainforest for like a week, do you need to bring a knife, clean drinking water, and maybe like some way to light a fire? No, you don't need to bring it. You could survive with your bare hands. But my god, it makes it a lot easier to survive and increases your chances of survival by a pretty significant margin if you do bring those resources. And it's the same with Ward. You don't need it, but I highly recommend it because it increases your chances of survival. Now, for Ward, I think you only want to get it, or you don't like need to get it until it's like difficulty 6, difficulty 7 onwards in terms of mutations. You don't need it for normal at all. So if you're going to go into like normal Genesis, you don't need to get Angry Earth Ward, but it would help. When it comes to knowing which ward to get, it just depends on the enemies that you're going to face in this dungeon. Now, I will link to a resource down below on New World Database. It shows you the enemy mob type that you will face in each particular expedition, and you're going to need to pick up a full set of ward for each expedition. So Human Ward, right now, this set that I have here is for the Empyrean Forge. Empyrean Forge just basically contains human enemies, so Human Ward is like a must-have, whether I'm tank, DPS, or healer. Getting Human Ward is a no-brainer. When we looked at the tank set earlier, my tank set had Ancient Ward on it, so if we just go over and switch to that real quick here, you can see that Ancient Ward is a perk that's active on here. So for Ancient Ward, I would be using that in an Ancient Dungeon, which could include like Lazarus Instrumentality, but also Starstone Barrows has quite a lot of Ancients, and the Ennead as well is also features like a lot of Ancients. So again, for particular mobs that you're facing against and which ward, and also again, which Bane you need to go for. Bane is the same thing. So your Bane on your weapons, with the exception of the healer, you don't need Bane on your life staff because it is just a healing weapon. But for tank and DPS, I recommend that you get Bane and Ward for the corresponding enemy type that you're going to be facing off against in the expedition. And again, link in the description down below to find out which expeditions contain which enemy types. Now, when it comes to gems in the armor, it is fairly similar to the sort of Ward and Bane thing. So you need to do your sort of research a little bit ahead of time and just look at which dungeon you're going to be entering into. Now, this is only relevant for mutated expeditions, but as you can see, Empyrean Forge and Starstone Barrows are mutated at time of recording of this video. Starstone Barrows has Nature, and it's that sort of third line down there that you see that is the scary thing. Well, actually, also Toxic is pretty scary as well. What I'm basically trying to say is you're going to take quite a lot of nature damage because it is a nature mutation. It's nature damage is the primary focus, whereas in Empyrean Forge has Icebound, and that just means that the enemies are much more likely to be doing ice damage to you, and ice-based damage is the threat that you're going to be going against. So for Empyrean Forge, going in as a healer or a tank or DPS, you would want to have the corresponding gems for ice damage absorption. So you can see with my healer set here, we have ice damage absorption, ice damage absorption. This is a cut pristine aquamarine. However, if I was going to be going into something like Tempest Heart, I'm playing as a DPS player and it's a nature mutation, then I'm going to go for cut pristine Amber, that's what it's called. So Amber gives us the nature damage absorption. So a quick breakdown: Amber for nature, Aquamarine for frost, Ruby for fire, and it's Amethyst for Void. And you want to be switching these gems out in your armor depending on what sort of element you're going against. So again, you can quickly get a heads up on the element by looking at the mutation here. So if you just hover over them, the mutated dungeons are the ones that have the sort of spinning red circle around them. Now, if you guys watch this video at a later date from when it came out, it might be Dynasty Shipyard with the spinning circle, or it could be the Depths with the spinning circle. You just want to hover over it and look at the top line. If it's green, nature, you know, if it's blue, it's going to be ice. If it's purple, it's void. If it's red, it's fire. And then you want to be changing your gems and also your ward and Bane relevant for that, you know, the challenge that you're going to be facing. And this also does extend to your amulet as well. So I try and do this thing where I get the corresponding gem to the corresponding protection. So I crafted an amulet that has health and nature protection, and then it's also got a nature gem. And we've done the same thing for ice here as well. So, and I try to put constitution on these so I can use them across all different builds. If I'm playing tank, healer, or DPS, a little bit of constitution is used in all of those builds. And you can see if we keep going down, we also have a fire version of this as well. So this is something that I would recommend you guys invest in. If you are looking to do group content, if you're looking to do mutated expeditions, investing into an amulet with the corresponding protection gem, I think is gonna take you far. Now, if you guys are still confused about the gems and the ward and the Bane and when each one is relevant, let me know in the comments down below. If we see enough comments, I'll probably make a separate video on this trying to break it down from like a beginner prospect all the way up to advanced, and hopefully that will help shed some light on it. But that is the best builds for Season 1, guys. If you guys have any other build suggestions, anything you want to recommend to other players, let me know in the comments down below. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you go ahead and click the like button, subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys all in the next video.